I've always been the type of person where I will openly go and do all the extra hours that need to be done, whether I was a young cook, like young apprentice, young cook, chef de party, whatever. I was always that type of guy that I'd happily go in on my days off and all this sort of stuff. A, because I thought that was what was expected, and B, because I wanted to consume, I wanted to learn, but I've also had to have the hard lesson of realising that that's also not necessarily always the best thing.
Today on Dirty Linen, we are talking about the culture of hospitality, what it's like to work in the industry, what are some of the things that can be especially challenging. Our guest today is Ben Parkinson. He's the sous chef at Pipis Kiosk in Albert Park, or is it Middle Park, Ben?
It's Albert Park.
Albert Park there on Port Phillip Bay, and a really lovely restaurant. We are speaking on a very nice sunny Melbourne day. Tell us a little bit about Pipis to get us started, Ben.
Pipis, it's a small little 38-seater. We're situated right on the bay there. The very good friend of mine, Jordan Clay, opened it with his business partner, Tom Hunter, who I worked with Jordan 10 years ago now at Pay Modern. They got the keys for it sort of January 2020, and then obviously the world went to hell in a handbasket. I joined them probably 7-8 months ago. We're a little beachside bistro, essentially. We are specialised, obviously, in seafood, being where we are, and we have a little kiosk attached. So, you can come and spend a day at the beach, and you can sit up at the wine bar and have some snacks and some drinks, or you can have some fish and chips and sit out on the sand. Small little operation, but we're all pretty proud of it, and a small knit team.
Yeah, so nice. Well, I think when I ate there, you probably hadn't started working there, Ben, but I think it's a lovely restaurant. I think something that Melbourne could do a lot more of is eating right on the bay. We do hug the bay, but we don't seem to embrace it with our restaurants. And I think what Pipi's doing, it's really approachable but really thoughtful food. And I've been sending a few people there recently for special occasions, or they're just wondering where to eat, and everybody has absolutely loved it. So congratulations on what you guys are creating there.
Well, thank you very much. I'll make sure I pass that obviously on to the guys. It is, without trying to be cliched, it is obviously largely a team effort. I do agree. I've lived on and off in Melbourne over the years, and it's always been one of those funny ones that the bay is so readily available to everybody, but there's few sparsely situated places around it that you can actually go and dine, relax and unwind and enjoy it for everything it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. So you reached out to me, we've been chatting on Instagram a little bit about the world of hospitality and, what it's like to be in the industry for a long time, to make it your life as you've done. I'd love to learn a bit more about you. Can you tell us, just tell us the story, Ben?
I'll dial it down. I'll make a Cliff Notes version. Started in the industry when I was 14, while I was still at high school. Just kind of fell into it as a school-based traineeship. Was just looking for a part-time job, but didn't want to work at Macca's. Kind of fell into it and just fell in love with it. Finished school, moved out of home, started my apprenticeship on the Gold Coast. Did my apprenticeship there for 3 years, Palazzo Versace, then moved to Melbourne because I had friends move down, and I was always also just looking like, Gold Coast, love it or hate it at the time. Back in 2009, 10, 11, there wasn't necessarily as much going on as there is now. So I was, 20-something looking for what's next. Moved to Melbourne, did a couple of years here in Melbourne, then went to Sydney, did a couple of years in Sydney, went to France, Belgium, England, back to Oz, travelled quite a bit. And that's one of the big things I love about the industry in a way, is it opens doors, it opens the world, But in saying that, I've seen the great side of it, and it's given me the opportunity to meet amazing people and travel, but I've also seen the unfortunate side of it. Not everything's always been rosy. I myself have, burnt out, or, definitely faced the pointy end of the stick a few years ago and went into therapy and sort of clawed my way back somewhat. It's taken me a long time to sort of come to terms with openly talking about that. I was just working 70, 80 hours a week. I was pretty isolated from friends, family, and all this sort of stuff as I was working overseas, and just down the rabbit hole. And obviously, being somewhat of a macho-based industry as well, I stupidly and naively thought the way to get through, being run down and being a bit burnt out was obviously just to keep pushing on, as the industry says. Is just to keep at it and just keep going for it, and you'll get through it. And that's not the way to do it. But I was quite fortunate that I had some good people that I was working with who kind of recognized the signs and kind of said, and had that difficult conversation, has sort of said to me, like, hey man, like we think you might want to look at, getting some professional help, and they were very supportive of that, and it sort of helped me get back on track. I've also seen, unfortunately, self-harm in others in the industry. I've seen physical violence inflicted on people. I've seen, like, without bringing the conversation down, I'm crucially aware, as to most people are, I think, of my generation of cook. I'm not that old, but just the tail end of sort of the old school. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly at times. 30. So as I said, I'm not that old, but I kind of feel like I'm kind of on the end of the old school mentality type thing, and we're all trying to push to. Yeah, I mean, well, once I got out of Brisbane, it was definitely, the world was my oyster, for want of a better term, and I just went after it.
Yeah. Gosh, you've said so much in such a short period of time. Your cliff notes are really packed. So let's pick some of those strands back up. So it's really interesting to hear that, your colleagues identified that you were showing some signs of burnout. What was it, do you think they saw?
Without going into too much detail, it was almost lighting the compost heap on fire and not realizing I was doing it. It was probably a large-scale one for them. We had 2 acres of property that we're growing all our own stuff on and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was definitely one of the signs, but it's also they had known me for a couple of years before we kind of worked together as well. And they just sort of said, like, you're not the same person. You used to be the guy that came in with like 3 million ideas of things you wanted to do and to learn and to try, and now you're kind of just coming in and a bit distant, detached, and just sort of always grumpy. And I think I was fortunate because obviously they were in a position where they'd known me for long enough that they could kind of identify the difference in behaviour and the difference in who I was. And one of them also did study psychology at university. So, they had a bit more of a potential sort of inside line on the warning signs, but they were just very aware of the situation and were sort of sat me down and had that hard conversation. And as silly as it sounds, I didn't really see the forest for the trees, until they sort of said to me, hey, we want to help you out, like we want to help you, and, you've helped us with our business. So they did. And
so, I mean, what did it feel like for you? Like, what was it like from the inside to be that guy setting the compost heap on fire?
Almost. I need to specify almost. Yeah, look, I can look back on it now with a bit of hindsight and a bit of clarity, and I can identify that I wasn't the same person, But at the time, I didn't necessarily blame everybody else, but there was definitely a lot of like external, or me thinking it was all externally based, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't sort of attribute it to me not looking after myself and not making enough time for myself. It was more, I just kind of thought either, I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't working hard enough, or, I stupidly and naively thought that those were the ways to sort of fix the way I felt, which was just, as I said, just to keep pushing on and keep doing it. And that just, it... Sometimes, like I will say in this industry, sometimes, yeah, you do just need to push on. But 9 times out of 10, that's not always the answer when it comes to bigger picture stuff like this.
It's such a tricky balance, isn't it? Because, as you say, you're in this culture, and the culture, whether silently or overtly, speaks to you about, what needs to be done. But it can be quite hard in that scenario, especially, as a young chef who's, there's a hierarchy there to really make a stand and say, no, I need to carve out certain things for myself.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard one, but I think it's definitely changing. There's definitely great people in the industry now that I know of, and obviously that you're probably aware of, that are making sure that, their guys are looked after, and that they're only doing, 40-hour weeks, and that they're prioritizing their staff and their people, And I think for all the detriment and all the horror that COVID has brought the nation, the world, and our industry, there are sort of some flip sides, and people will probably even hate me for saying this. There are some good things which are coming out of it, which is especially in this industry, people are realizing that we need to stop and smell the roses, for want of a less cliched term, a bit more, and be aware of that with our staff or with the people and friends and colleagues that we work with, because at the end of the day, I know myself, if you have that time away from your job, even if you love the job, you're always better at it when you go back to it. Dedicating 9 hours a week to something sometimes can be healthy and amazingly beneficial, but majority of the time it's not, because if you're giving 90 hours a week to your job or to any pursuit, it means you're not dedicating time, whether it be to yourself, to your partner, to your family, that you're always losing it somewhere else.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I reckon, some of the things that I've heard from, old school chefs who wear those 90-hour weeks and all the hardship and the shoutiness almost as a badge of honor. There is also this idea that, they learnt so much, yes, it's really tough, but you cram in the learning as well. But it sounds like, from your experience, what you're saying is that there's other ways to, I guess, get that knowledge or achieve the finesse.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting career path because especially in the kitchen, there's some things that you can't learn until you do it. The more you do it, the better you get. It's a craft in some forms, However, I can see, and this is going to sound a bit silly, but I can see in my lifetime or in my experience in the industry, right? When I was first starting out as an apprentice, YouTube was barely a thing. Instagram didn't exist. Facebook was barely in its infancy, right? Whereas an apprentice chef this day and age, we've got one at Pipi's, and he's a great young apprentice, and he works incredibly hard. But I mean, I'm kind of envious in a way of him because he has the ability to, if he wants to learn new techniques, learn ideas, like you can go on YouTube and type in almost any cookery technique you want, and I guarantee you there'll be videos and explanations about it. You've got the internet at your fingertips. So there's easier ways to get that knowledge and to consume it and to learn, and then you can almost use your 40-hour week to actually put that into practice, if that makes sense. Like there's more bows in the string this day and age for a young cook to be able to learn and progress than there was 10, 20, 30, however long you want to go back.
Yeah. It really does make sense, Ben. Actually, it's never really clicked for me in that way of the way that the internet can become that sort of tool that actually helps achieve work-life balance. I suppose, we're always thinking work-life balance means getting off screens, but there is actually so much learning to be done on screens as well.
Absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, in some industries, definitely, like, I don't know, I've never worked in any other industry, but if you're an investment banker, sure, getting away from your screens might be the best thing for you, But if you're in hospitality, which is largely an interpersonal job, career, and you spend a lot of your time, actually on your feet and physically out doing things within reason, potentially screen time, there's probably people out there that hate me for saying this, can be a good thing and definitely can be an amazing learning tool, because you can be put in contact with other people via social media. You can see a chef doing a technique on his Instagram page and a young apprentice can ask him questions about it. Or, I saw a couple of weeks ago, Renee, Red Zeppi, commented on a post from a guy in the States who was talking about doing a dish, and Renee was like, hey, I don't know if you should be using those because they're actually poisonous in Northern Europe, So, yeah, but it turned out it was okay. It was a slightly different variation of a plant and all this sort of stuff. But I'm just trying to highlight the fact that there's so much more ways to connect and to learn and to grow as a young cook or young waiter or in any form of the industry outside of just pushing on.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. I think also, you mentioned mental health, and I think people can also connect to the benefit of their mental health. There are so many resources online and people that are speaking about, mental health challenges. So I guess there's also that.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of apps there are this day and age, whether it be Headspace or, I'm pretty sure Beyond Blue has one, or there's so many different ways you can connect with others or ways you can connect with mental health professionals that makes it a bit easier. And I mean, it also makes it easier for once you get into a position of sort of management or hierarchy, because it also gives you tools to help learn to what to look for and how to help contribute and lead your team without being unaware of that. I mean, no one teaches you how to lead a kitchen. It's not part of your TAFE apprenticeship. Last time I checked, you know what I mean? And I know that might sound sort of silly, and I've worked with some people over the years which definitely have contributed to teaching me leadership directly and emphasize delegation and all that sort of stuff. But no one really teaches you that once you get to a certain level, you're responsible for making sure everyone's okay, and checking in with them, and, making sure that you're creating a work environment that is actually fun and enjoyable, not just for yourself, but for others, and that comes with experience, but also surely there's definitely something we can do as an industry to maybe better that and become a resource or something. I don't know. It's something that's kind of struck me, obviously, in the last couple of years, stepping into senior roles, that there's a bit of a lack of teaching or not necessarily teaching, but a lack of sort of guidance when it comes to chefs taking senior roles, because unfortunately I know myself that when you get into those senior roles, you will have those moments where unfortunately you will lash out or you will yell at someone or whatever, and then you'll hate yourself after it because you're just like, I don't want to be that guy. But because that's what happened to you, it doesn't excuse it, but it's almost your automatic response because it's been so ingrained into you. I'm not trying to condone it in any form, but I'm guilty of it. I'm not going to lie and say I haven't. But it's how do we break the mold so that we can just continue to develop an industry that actually attracts people to it, as opposed to people leaving in droves like they currently are.
Yeah, look, I really hear what you're saying. I mean, and it does seem like perhaps in some larger organisations where there are deeper, taller management structures, there might be an opportunity to have, like training manuals or more mentoring, or perhaps, that time that you can take away from the daily grind to learn leadership skills, for example. But in the small businesses, which is what most restaurants are, it would be really hard to carve out that time to just learn to lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some people say the easiest way or the best way to learn to lead is doing it. But I definitely feel like, you learn to drive a car. You don't just get in it and do it. You get some instruction and you do your hours and you learn that way. You're not just told, oh, yeah, here's the keys, go for it.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you're leading young people, it's so easy to turn someone's life for good or for bad with, fantastic or poor leadership. And as you say, people are leaving the industry in large numbers. It's hard to attract people into hospitality. Every person that's in there, they're so important that they get nurtured and given the best opportunity to succeed. So I feel like learning leadership on the job without, great mentors yourself can be really damaging. And I'm sure, when you've, I guess, had those really tricky experiences that have sent you to, to some hard places, to then feel that you're not being the best version of yourself must be really quite devastating at times.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hard one to deal with. And, I've worked in places where physical violence, for instance, is not necessarily condoned, but it's not necessarily deterred. And that's obviously an extreme example of it. But I feel like what I'm trying to say in referencing that is the fact that, small businesses, in Australia, internationally, wherever they may be, let's maybe keep it to Australia, obviously, for this conversation. But you're in a position where as a young cook, and I've got some friends, obviously, across the country that are in obviously similar roles like I am, and I've talked to some of them, and I was talking to one of them recently where he said he was in a similar position where it was obviously non-violent, but he kind of was in a position where he turned around and lashed out and yelled at one of the younger cooks, and at the end of the night he was just sort of sitting there just like, it doesn't help anybody. Like, it didn't even make me feel better, it didn't achieve anything, but it is a high-pressure job, but I feel like we can't use that as an excuse because, a surgeon is a high-pressure job and you don't see them yelling and screaming at the nurses or, the person they're performing surgery on.
Well, actually, I have read some pretty full-on articles about the hospital system. So let's not put surgeons on too much of a pedestal. It probably happens in every industry, but I definitely hear what you're saying.
I can assure you I won't, as my mother is a nurse and has been for all her life, and all done all this sort of stuff. So I can assure you, my eyes are well and truly open. But just trying to sort of use that more as a example of high pressure environments don't always have to be yelling, screaming, and using the high pressure of it as an excuse. I just feel like that's a scapegoat almost.
Yeah, 100%. It's not an excuse. It's just, what do you do with that pressure? How do you release it or use it for good? How do you use it? How does it become a teaching moment for the leader and the person that's perhaps set something on fire? Ben, you mentioned that you had some therapy when things weren't going so well for you in England. I mean, is there anything that you learnt in that's helped you go forward?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all very personal, obviously, and it's all very down on the person. But I mean, I've always been the type of person where I will openly go and do all the extra hours that need to be done, whether I was a young cook, like young apprentice, young cook, chef de partie, whatever. I was always that type of guy that I'd happily go in on my days off and all this sort of stuff. A, because I thought that was what was expected, and B, because I wanted to consume, I wanted to learn, but I've also had to have the hard lesson of realizing that that's also not necessarily always the best thing. And so me having to put some self-imposed boundaries on myself to make sure that I actually then look after myself better. But one of the big things I learned, at least, was also recognizing sort of not trigger points, because I don't like the connotation, but noticing behaviors of mine where I recognize and go, okay, I'm looking at this or looking at that. I need to take a step back or sort of run or I cycle or do whatever I do to sort of refresh my headspace. So unfortunately, it's not necessarily tips that I can sort of hand out to people or tell you that would work for them. But one of the biggest things was also kind of just being able to identify more changes or being identified occasions in my life that I'm like, hey, okay, I'm dedicating way too much time to this, or not reaching out and talking to friends in a couple of weeks, and then them being like, hey, have you dropped off the face of the earth? And it's like, oh yeah, I kind of have, and using that as a bit of a check as to say, well, I can take a step back.
And did you find, when you were able to take that step back, that you realized that there were things you were interested in the world that you hadn't even sort of noticed or thought too much about, that other things opened up for you?
Oh, 100%. I've always been quite physically active, or tried to be, outside of the industry, but obviously, as anybody in the industry will tell you, it's pretty consuming, and to try and keep some type of training regime is pretty difficult. But it's kind of like I've now started like bouldering for the last year and a half. And it's completely outside the scope of hospitality, but I've been getting into that, which I love too, because when you're hanging on the side of a wall, you can't have your phone on you. You can't, like you're completely, for want of a better term, at one with the climb or the wall. There's no distractions, there's no anything, which I really enjoy myself and helps me keep sort of on the straight and narrow, I suppose. But exercise has definitely been one that I've definitely enjoyed more, and just reading more that's not hospitality based, and just engaging in music and as silly as it sounds, just picking up hobbies a lot more. Once I kind of had that moment and realized to take a step back, and realized that taking a step back can actually be a largely positive and beneficial for myself and for my job and my workplace.
Yeah, it doesn't sound silly at all. It sounds really fantastic. And can you point to any ways in which having those broader interests and activities has helped you in your career as a chef?
It's connected me with some people as largely. I know, especially in Sydney where I was, there's a large community of chefs that all like to boulder and climb. And it's kind of funny, you'll be at some of the bouldering gyms on a Monday morning and it's almost like the who's who of cooking in Sydney at times. Which is kind of amusing, but it's almost most of them don't talk to each other because everyone's there trying to escape hospitality. So everyone sort of waves or nods, but that's the end of it. But I've also just noticed my own creativity has largely improved, because I'm not constantly thinking and stressing and worrying about the job, because I am switching off and going into and being involved in other pursuits or just life, I suppose. That when I am at work, I'm more focused. When I'm thinking about, engaging with Jordan and Tommy and the guys, like I'm a lot more switched on and just sort of energized about food. Whereas, if you met me a couple of years ago and asked me to sort of, do a dish or come up with something, I would have been absolutely brain dead and wouldn't really have been able to contribute much at all.
Wow, that's so transformative, isn't it? It's incredible. It also makes me think that when you do have these outside interests and, that your mind's working in lots of different ways, that you would have a different perspective. Like if there is a crisis in the kitchen, that perhaps you would, have more personal resources at your disposal to just, take that deep breath and handle things in a way that you'd be proud of later.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like as I said, I feel like if you commit to 90 hours a week of doing something, in the short term, it can be hellishly beneficial. I mean, you look at artists, musicians, you look at that sort of spectrum of people that dedicate, whole months of the year or whatever to whatever they're pursuing, and it can have absolutely superb outcomes. But if that then becomes the norm of your life, I feel like that's sort of the slippery slope where it starts to become negative. When you're dedicating such a time and effort and energy to doing something, but with that moment you start saying to your partners, your family, whatever, oh, sorry, I can't make it to the family lunch or to grandmother's birthday or to whatever it may be, because you're so too focused on that one direction that you kind of lose sight of everything else, and therefore you're losing sight of actually why you do the job, what you love about the job, because you've got the blinkers on, and it isn't beneficial for anybody.
Yeah. I know we're talking pretty big picture, which I think is fantastic, but there's one thing that's been happening in the industry recently that I'd love to touch on, and I reckon perhaps it's related.
The C word?
Yeah, the C word. Is that COVID?
For this conversation, sure. But yeah, I mean, COVID's a funny beast. I mean, you talk with the guys at Pipis and you talk with anybody that's opened a venue in the last couple of years, I mean, I don't think anybody opening a venue, let's say, the start of 2020, thought COVID was going to have to be something they would have considered. I think most business owners opening venues in 2020 were probably thinking like, hey, wage costs, staffing, the usual sorts of things. Not how am I going to navigate a pandemic, which, I mean, in Melbourne, you've had it horrendous, to put it bluntly. I got down to Melbourne isolated for 2 weeks, came out of lockdown the day you guys got out of isolation, the day you went into number 4. So that was fun. Yeah, but as I said before, it's definitely dealt a lot of blows to the industry, and it's unfortunate to see all the places that have shut and all the people that are walking away from the industry and the desolation that it's caused. But I'm hoping we're now getting to a point where there's some kind of roadmap out. I mean, no one really has it, but I'm hoping people are sort of having an idea as to how to continue to move forward, and also how to sort of be proactive and positive in the mindsets of looking after their staff. And when I say staff, I mean their people, their friends, their colleagues, and looking at bigger picture things. It's why I kind of am talking about bigger picture things, because they're what's important. I mean, I know of businesses that have shut. I'm sure, you're well aware as to businesses that have shut or that have had hard times, or, people that have lost everything because of it. But I will say, in this country, we definitely seem to be quite resilient with it. I've got friends overseas where, they haven't. A friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, hasn't worked in the restaurant that he was head chef at for 2 years because they haven't been able to reopen it. And he's working for one of the other restaurants that they own. And he's obviously still busy and still working. But the venue that he was running and was doing very well, they haven't operated for 2 years because they can't get the staff to fill it to open it. And this is in Paris. This isn't some rural restaurant overseas. This is a huge metropolitan city.
Yeah, that's really devastating. What do you think, Ben, about, it's obviously Omicron swept through Australia and it's been hard to avoid encountering it, but it concerns me that there's been almost a normalisation among hospitality staff of getting COVID. And of course, it's no one's fault when they get it, but I feel like not every business or every worker thinks that it's worth trying to avoid it.
Yeah, it's a funny situation. I myself know of some friends and things like that have been in workplaces or been in situations where people in their restaurant have gotten it, or they've had to shut for a couple of days, or, and there seems to be a lot of sort of blaming that person for getting it. And it's like, this person, it's not like they went out and, said, hey, to go and do this. So you can't really hold them accountable for it. So I think there's definitely that side of the spectrum where we just, unfortunately, unfortunately, that it is going to go through venues. We're an interpersonal business, we're an interpersonal industry. We thrive on exactly that, welcoming you in and feeding you and looking after you and being hospitable. And so that is hugely, for want of, I'm not using the word 6 times in a row, interpersonal in itself, in its action. It's a direct response. So it's going to sweep through the industry first and foremost before it does in other industries. And unfortunately, there have been some cases that I've known of, or people I've been talking to, that have been sort of told to not go out of their way to get it, but hey, you're shutting for a couple of weeks, guys. Maybe now would be a good time for you to go and get it. And I'm like, what? Your employer can't say that to you. And they're like, oh, they meant it as a joke. I'm like, yeah, but the fact that they're saying that to you, that doesn't actually mean, like, no, they're not joking. In some form, they're being serious. Thankfully, the person that friend of mine was, she's subsequently then left that employment. So, she's in a better position now. But yeah, it's definitely, as I said, it kind of comes back in the conversations you and I have had previously, that push on attitude is kind of resurfacing. And it's like, oh, you've got COVID, or you'll be out for a week, but oh, maybe you can come in and do a couple of days or whatever. It's like, no, this industry, we're entitled to sick leave, right? You are entitled to these things, all because the industry for a long time made you think you weren't, and definitely pushed that diatribe of like, oh, if you can stand, you can work. I've definitely had that happen to me. And a funny story, I got yelled and screamed at when I was out sick many years ago as an apprentice, and I came back from being sick and off for probably about a week, and doctor's certificates and all this sort of stuff. And on my first day back at work, I was taken to the cool room and absolutely abused for doing so. But that's a long time ago now, and it's fine. Yeah, well, as I said, it was a long time ago, and that is the industry that it was. But this day and age, it's if people have it or people get it, it's okay. Just let us know. I think, at least I would much rather be working with people that, hey, they're honest and they tell you, hey, I've done a rat test, I'm positive, I can't come in. It's like, thank you. Because in my way of looking at it, it means the business, we can take steps to check us to make sure that we're not, positive, and then we can continue to run the business, which means we can continue to pay your sick leave, which means we can continue to look after our guests, which means we can all continue to do what we're doing.
I think if those messages aren't coming through from, leadership in restaurants to all staff, then that restaurant is failing in its duty of care, not only to its staff, but also to its diners. And it's, very troubling.
I know myself, where we are at Pipis, we've got rat tests on site for all staff. You know what I mean? If there is ever that case that they start feeling a bit that we're able to deal with it and act accordingly. Without to put a microscope on us, but we're a small business. We hold 38 people. We have a staff, I think, of maybe 15 to 20 at most. So for us, it's like we'd rather everybody be working together and sort of say, hey, I'll be out for a week, than, the whole business goes down. And I don't want to talk too much, obviously, for the business, as it is not my own. But Tommy and Jordan have been very, very on board and very sort of leading from the front throughout this whole situation of wanting to look after the staff. And through the lockdowns, everyone's been looked after. We've been fortunate that we had the kiosk window to trade through, so we were able to stay open in some form the whole way, so we're fortunate that with those two guys leading the business, it's very sort of family centric, and we are a small, tight knit team that want to look after each other, you know. But I know in bigger places and bigger venues, you know, that I know of places that whole groups of, or whole arms divisions, you know, 3 or 4 venues of restaurant groups have shut down because they've all caught COVID, and they've kind of all been told, well, that's not good enough. And it's like, well, what do you mean that's not good enough?
Yeah, guys, it's a pandemic. It's great to hear that you're in a place where things are done properly, Ben. Look, it's been really so valuable and interesting to hear everything you've got to say. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Not that I can think of. I just you know, want people to continue to support hospitality in whatever way they can, you know, whether that's going to your local cafe and grabbing a coffee once a week, or whether that's dining out. I mean, we're an industry which we're resilient and will continue to bounce back and will continue to be here. But I don't think sometimes some people realize how much of a difference that can make to a business. You know, we're fortunate where we are. We've got a very good group of regulars which come and say good day, and, you know, we all kind of know very well because we're a small business, which is amazing, you know, and it's delightful to have that. But I know there's other little cafes and stuff near where I live that, you know, I go and support, because, you know, I need a coffee in the morning, otherwise I don't really function. But it's not being on the other side of it. It's nice. You understand how nice it can be when you see those regular people and you go and support other businesses, and it doesn't necessarily seem like much, but that can be the difference with some places between keeping the lights on and paying the staff and moving on.
Absolutely, yeah. We all have the power to make a difference. I certainly think that you have made a difference in this conversation, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Dirty Linen. Thank you for coming to the table today.
Cheers, thanks. You have a good day.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.